Thank you so much for joining me today. We're super excited to dive into CIM strategy. Let's start off by chatting about your US strategy. I know that you have multiple strategies that our team has looked at Align. Can you talk about the strategy just at a pretty high level? Our clients have obviously already read the DD memos and have talked to their advisors about it, so don't spend too much time here, but help break it down for us. What are you doing in the US?
Yeah, and in the United States, we are providing debt capital to help scale and demonstrate these new innovative fintech ways of getting capital to underserved small businesses and low income communities for whom the system is broken. And so we're really trying to help prove out these models that provide both access as well as potentially scale and capital to serve this part of the market that has not received a lot of capital over the last 20, 30 years.
It's really interesting when I think about financial inclusion or I think about providing capital, I often think about emerging markets and there being a more significant need there. Granted, I did just read Poverty by America, which anyone who's talked to me in the last few months, I have recommended it to them, and it talks a lot about sort of financial structures in the US and the role that financial inclusion needs to play in imagining a more equitable country. Can you speak to why that is your thesis? Did you guys start with emerging markets and then go to US, and what sort of sparked doing the work in the US?
Yeah, I think that often folks do not realize how broken the United States is, especially when compared with emerging markets. And I include myself in that category. I mean, I actually started out working with refugees in Azerbaijan making microloans. And so, you know, being from the US and spending time abroad, you don't realize, I would say, how broken the system is. But the US is dynamic in that way, where we do have in one ways the richest country in terms of many of the indicators for half of the population, but the other half of the population actually lives in an emerging market within the United States, and so I think that the 25% of people in the United States are underserved, and small businesses, for example, have had a hard time getting capital from banks, really going back to the savings and loan crisis of the 80s and just getting worse sort of every decade in terms of banks not lending to communities. And so, we think a lot about sort of the "this is wonderful life," type of community banking, perhaps, of like George Bailey out there lending to the community. That doesn't, if that existed, back then, it certainly doesn't exist today.
Mhm.
And so many small businesses fall through the cracks, and low income communities are preyed on by payday lenders, et cetera. And so, I think that we've been able to see the rise of all of this digital innovation, which is embedding now capital into the digital lives of both
Mhm.
businesses as well as individuals, which is one of the great bright spots of being able for underserved people to be able to get access to data, to be able to get access to capital, and to really be able to grow their businesses in a more responsible way.
Yeah, that's really helpful and important context. It makes me think of I've been spending a lot of time just the last several months around the role of private capital and policy. And I feel like I've started to view America as the experiment that it initially was, because I'm sort of like, look at us, like our inequity has kept growing over the years in a lot of ways, even though it seems like there's been so much work to address inequity through policy over the last, several decades. But I almost think we like, it's that like degree thing where we like started going in this 3 degrees off from creating a more equitable world hundreds of years ago, and it's like where we are today. To your point, we've created a country where there's extreme wealth and extreme poverty, and I like the concept of using digital financial tools to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, rising income inequality, I think, is one of the generational challenges alongside
Yeah.
with climate change, which we are tackling, and and yet it's complex, right? Because rising income inequality is also a byproduct of a system which rewards merit and provides
Mhm.
opportunity for all. I mean, there is no country quite like the United States where immigrants come and build incredible companies. And so, I think that we need to sort of look holistically at how we can use some of that technology, much of it built by immigrants, in fact,
Mhm.
to also work with the economy as it leaves many folks behind, and try to continue to improve with that vision. And so, one of the things that we need is we need capital that is even if it's risk-based, market-oriented capital, can focus on finding the incredible value of the folks who are underserved
Mhm.
by serving them with more efficiency and better systems. And that's really what we're trying to do at CIM is scale those innovations until they can graduate into the financial mainstream. We've been doing that for 10 years. We actually started at CIM focused on the US and then moved to emerging markets because that was really where the technology had evolved
Mhm.
as
Mhm.
opposed to where the need was, but see lots of need globally as well as in the US.
It's really interesting and totally makes sense. Is there anything else that you'd want a potential investor to know about you or about CIM that wouldn't be obvious from the outside or obvious from the 60-page diligence memo my team put together?
I think it really gets to why the team is doing this on a daily basis, right?
Mhm.
And many of us, like I myself, came to this work more from a human rights and international development perspective. Having worked now in financial inclusion for 20 years, um, certainly while we are focused on giving great risk adjusted returns, the driver of much of this work for me goes back to the refugee camps that I used to work in Azerbaijan. And for our team, it's very personal as well in terms of a strongly mission aligned group that believes that with enough persistence and creativity, we can create the world that we want to live in. And I think that that's just really important in what we do in our investing and also in the impact that we generate, both in terms of the underserved borrowers, these innovations which we're trying to scale and demonstrate, and a lot of the policy work that we are engaged in as well. Many folks may not realize that actually CIM is working with different state policymakers to pass laws to actually put in place protections for small businesses. Because while you work in the space of innovation, you also want to make sure that you're keeping up in terms of guardrails to
Mhm.
keep predatory practices and others out, so that we're just not innovating new and creative ways to rip people off, right? And so there's a lot of work that goes into both the impact and the financial side of this to do it well and build that world that we want to be a part of.
It's really interesting. I didn't realize that you guys were engaged on the policy side. That's really cool. I also love, you just said persistence and creativity. And I feel like those are two incredible core values for an organization like CIM or like Align. Um, is there anything else that you want to share in terms of your personal why? I know you just kind of glossed over it, but are there any stories or anything that really drove you to do this work that you want to share?
Well, I think there's for me there's probably two things. There's the family that I grew up in that really believed that it was our duty to leave the world a little bit better off than we found it, and my father especially, who was a family therapist for many years, and just was an inspiration to me. And then my wife is a human rights professor, and when I was thinking I was going to pursue actually medieval history and language when I was in school, but wanted to have a little bit more of an impact in the day to day, was really influential for me to sort of push me to think about international development and human rights, and really set me on the trajectory I'm on 20 plus years later.
That's really cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Jacob. Super excited to be your partner in this and really excited for our clients to get to hear from you a bit more about the strategy.
No, thank you. Align's been a great partner, and look forward to hearing from any clients who want to dig in more. Thanks.
Awesome.